Hello.
Hey Sandra.
I'm really excited to have you here for my vlog. Such an inspiring person, an author, speaker, a mountaineer, but first of all, a climber with absolutely amazing achievement, the first woman to climb Mount Everest from both sides. Welcome, and
Thank you.
let's go. Let's start from the beginnings. How a woman from South Africa ended up in Andorra, a tiny European country, but with the mountains, but not the highest mountains. What's your story?
Well, it wasn't the mountains. It wasn't the taxes either, which is the other reason people come.
Yeah.
I'm South African, and under apartheid, traveling was difficult because there were sanctions against South Africa. So once the situation had normalized towards the end of the 1990s, I was in my late 20s by then, and I wanted to travel. I wanted to see more of the world. I also wanted to go somewhere, honestly, where I could earn more money, because I was doing these big sponsored Himalayan expeditions, but it was hard work to find sponsors, and you always have to put some of your own money in, inevitably. And it was, the South African rand was just falling and falling, against the dollar. So I was looking for a way into Europe. I loved the idea of Europe, the history, the culture, the variety. As a kid, I studied history of art, and those impressionist paintings of women with parasols in fields of poppies in south of France. So I thought, south of France, north of Italy, north of Spain, that would be lovely.
Quite a bit different.
They had the passive residence system. And in fact, the way I found it, I was working with what we call a speaker bureau, an agency that places different kinds of speakers for big corporate events. And they have an office here in La Massana, Celebritat International. The head office, I think, in London or in England. And they put me on to Andorra, suggested I come over here. This must have been in 2000.
So you're my guide right now, and we're going to a place that when you saw, you thought Andorra could be my home. And what was your first impression of Andorra? How did you adapt? Did you have any particular difficulties?
Putting aside the landscape, which I thought was absolutely amazing, and that's kind of why I did move here, the big culture shock was how small everything is in terms of living space. South Africa is a little like the United States. Everybody's living in massive houses, big gardens. We drive everywhere. There's a lot of space, and we spread out in it. So I got here, and I'm not used to a place where everyone lives in apartments. And then all the rooms within the apartments are small.
Tiny, yes.
So all of that took quite a lot of getting used to. Eventually I've managed to buy a house that I love. So I kind of found something that worked for me, but initially it all felt a little claustrophobic.
Yeah, I have been living here for almost 7 years, and during that time I can already see Andorra changing, and I can see a development. You've been here for longer, and for sure you have much wider perspective. What do you think about the development in the country?
Well, it's difficult because I think everybody thinks that the point when they arrived is charming, and all the development that's happened since is a shame. That's a little self-serving because we're all starting from different points. So I was here during the kind of construction bubble of the early 2000s, and I think that they did get a little carried away. Now it feels like we're sort of, the COVID aside, in a new phase of kind of growing construction, but that it's being done with a little more care and better environmental rules. Better limitations to try and make sure that buildings fit in with the character of the villages.
And before we talk about what you're doing right now, I would like to come back to what made you famous, so Everest. And if I'm not wrong, you started climbing during your university years, and then at the age of 28 you reached the summit of Everest from the south side. So it sounds like quite a fast track.
Well, 27 actually.
All right.
Yes, The thing that's actually the most interesting is I had no intention of climbing Everest. Everyone assumes that I must have, been dreaming about it since I was 6 and working towards a lifelong goal. No, none of that. I found sort of the outdoors as a teenager at a summer camp. It wasn't something my family did. But I liked camping, I liked hiking. And I got to university and took up rock climbing and thought, no, this is great. It's the first physical sport I was ever any good at.
All right.
I went to all-girls school where we did the sort of appropriate team sports for ladies.
Yes.
I hated all of it. So rock climbing felt so much freer and more independent, and it wasn't about winning and losing. It was about challenging yourself and exploring. And I loved all of that. And I just kept on going by being curious. What would it be like to climb higher rock walls? What would it be like to go to mountains and climb in snow? What does it take to climb on glaciers? Climbing at altitude, what would that be like? And that took me to Central Africa and South America and then Europe. And the next place I wanted to go was the Himalaya. But it was so hard back then, no commercial expeditions. So you had
super expensive, I imagine.
Super expensive, but you had to find a group of people to go with. And, people go with their friends. Nobody wants to take a inexperienced person they don't know into a team. So it's really hard to break in. And there were virtually no women climbing at that time there either. So I was scratching around. And then there was this big newspaper front page, first South African Everest expedition. And of course the team were all men. But then one of the sponsors was a newspaper. So this newspaper decided that the first South African Everest attempt wasn't even that interesting. And
it's
that
going
they
to
would
look good if there's a woman.
Yeah, well, not only that, they're going to kind of sex up the coverage by running a competition to find a girl.
Oh, okay.
We weren't using the word reality television yet, but it was very early reality television. So they ran a competition, and these women had to write in and motivate, well, myself included. And I still wasn't after Everest. They were going to take a short list of 6 women, and we were going to go, the short list would go and climb Kilimanjaro, which is the highest mountain in Africa.
The roof of Africa.
And I thought, I bet I can make the short list. There's just not that many women.
Yeah.
And then I get a free trip to Kilimanjaro. So I did. I made the short list, I climbed Kilimanjaro, and I got off at the place on the team.
I have a lot of, admire your achievement, because I know as well that you've done it the old school, the humble way. And I remember we had a brief chat after I watched the movie Everest about how commercialized the expeditions got. And then last year I saw a picture of this absolutely massive line of people queuing to the summit of Everest. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I started to get an impression that Everest became some sort of a cure for rich men's midlife crisis. Is it still the same mountain?
A friend of mine who climbed it in 2019 says you don't even need to take an ice axe anymore. There's a fixed safety line from base camp. You just clip into the safety line and basically just shuffle your way up the line until you arrive at the summit. So that's not climbing. But that's only one route in the spring season.
Yep.
There are, I'm not sure exactly, 15, 17 maybe, different ways of climbing Everest. You can go in autumn, you can go in winter, which is another one the Polish were famous for.
Yeah.
If you really want to make it hard, go and do it in winter. And then on the east side of Everest, there are at least 2 potential lines that no one's ever climbed.
So, as you said, I'm Polish, and Poland, for some reason, it's climbing the highest mountains is super popular, and
you guys are crazy.
Yeah,
you really have done some
very successful. And
things.
in fact, first European woman and the third overall was Wanda Rutkiewicz, who, if it comes to Everest, and I remember reading these books and reading about these not very charming conditions, like peeing into a plastic bottle and then holding onto it just because it's warm, and it doesn't really sound very appealing for me. And then I've heard the stories about how people do it nowadays, and what's the biggest extravaganza that we can expect at the base camp?
Ooh, well, the thing that really gets me is they now they bring in a mobile phone mast to base camp.
All right.
So they're actually on the back of a yak, because there's still no roads. You can't drive to base camp on the south side. So on the back of a yak, they stick in bits, I assume, a mobile phone mast, bring it into Everest, set it up so that you can use your mobile phone at this point all the way to the summit. And basically just
watch Netflix.
Watch Netflix, WhatsApp. One team Snapchatted their way, all the way up to the summit of Everest.
Talking about it, if you haven't done any hiking in your life and you arrive, let's say, to Andorra and you want to climb one of the mountains there, almost 3,000 meters, so let's say Casamania, that still is a big effort, and you can still get some mild symptoms of altitude sickness, you can get headaches. So I'm just wondering, what can money buy you if it comes to climbing Everest? Of course, you can buy like the whole organizational side of the trip, as well as the knowledge. So someone who will tell you what to do, someone who will read the weather and tell you, how to do it. But I expect that you still need some certain level of fitness and knowledge, or?
Yes, but the point is that people look at physical achievements and assume that it's all about fitness.
Yeah.
Whereas fitness and strength, because it's not just cardiovascular fitness, it's physical muscular strength as well. That's the foundation. That's like the opening bid. Nobody can do it without having a certain level of physical strength.
Yeah.
What's much harder to visualize is the level of kind of knowledge, expertise, and experience.
Yeah.
And we have the same problem here in Andorra. Yes, on a summer's day when there's not a cloud in the sky and there's no wind and the temperatures are lovely, of course anyone who's reasonably fit can walk up Casamania, walk back down, go, well, that was easy.
Yeah.
Try going back up Casamania on a day when the torb is blowing, so these 100 kilometer an hour winds, in winter with snow, and the torb is picking up the snow, so you have a ground storm.
Yeah.
And not having the expertise to keep yourself warm, to anticipate hypothermia, to navigate in a whiteout. Suddenly people can die on Casamania, and people do die in the mountains of Andorra.
Yeah.
And it's so much harder to kind of visualize what expertise and experience and skill looks like, but that's actually what makes a mountaineer when they go to Everest themselves, rather than just having a guide tell them what to do and a Sherpa to carry their equipment.
I don't want us talking about Everest to sound so negative, and mountaineering in general, and there's still so many virgin peaks, there's still so many mountains. You can do it in the summer, in the winter, and in fact, I've heard this quite crazy statistic that there's been more people in space than on the peaks of 8,000 meter mountains in the wintertime. So it shows that there's still so much out there for mountaineers. And what has been your motivation? What was driving you, and what drives you now?
Mountaineering, again, looks like it's all about standing on the summit. But the truth is, you spend 5 minutes on the summit. The view from the summit isn't a lot different from the view you had, 100 meters earlier, or a couple of 100 meters further down the mountainside. As far as I'm concerned, you've got to be doing it for the experience.
So it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
It's a process of curiosity. What would it be like to be in that environment? And what would I be like while I attempt to manage the risks, the difficulties, the uncertainties? That's interesting to me.
And you're still doing that. You're still going for adventures, but what you're making your living off is being a motivational speaker, a keynote speaker. And it's not like you're speaking to athletes, to sportsmen, and tell them how to achieve their goals, but you're actually speaking with corporations, with big industries. So can climbing Everest be some sort of a metaphor for our everyday life, for achieving goals at work, at home? How do you work with these people? What sort of lessons can you teach them through your experience?
Everest is already incredibly deeply embedded in our culture as a metaphor for achieving things. Everyone's always doing their Everest of X and Y. But I think that's not actually the most interesting analogy. Again, it's not about goal achievement. It's about creating teams that can manage projects successfully in uncertain conditions. That's what's interesting, because it's mountaineering. One of the important things is knowing when to give up.
Yep.
There are absolutely times when it's suicidal to keep on going for the summit. You need to keep in mind there are two goals: getting to the top, coming home alive, and you may have to pick between the two goals.
Yeah.
And pick the right one. So it's this side of it that I find is interesting. It's about taking a group of ambitious people who might have a certain tendency to compete with each other rather than collaborate with each other, and trying to get them to collaborate together in these high stress, high risk environments. And obviously a company could bring in a business guru. But the trouble with that, they've heard it before. By the time they're middle or senior management, they've heard all of this. They just stop listening. They either feel criticized or they're like, oh, I know this. Whereas I come to them from a completely different environment. They don't know it. And I'm telling them this story that's dramatic and life and death. And
these must be the stories they've only read in books or watched on TV.
Exactly. And of course, a lot of high-level executives rather fancy that if they hadn't given their life to business, they too would have been a world-class athlete or a world-class adventurer. They've got, the egos are fairly big in the boardroom. But nevertheless, it allows me to come in from a position of authority, talking about something completely different. But in its essence, we're talking about the same issues. Taking ambitious people and getting them to collaborate in difficult circumstances for certain outcomes.
Exactly. What are you doing here? Have you climbed all the Andorran mountains?
Not all of them. I've done quite a lot. But
do you have your favorite?
I love Casamania for being in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
And you really can do this, like everything I see before me is my country.
Yes.
That's it. We can see from border to border.
Yeah.
All the peaks like Mont Blanc, which are on the border with France, that gives you a magnificent view down into France.
Okay.
But Andorra is a good place to live for climbing because just over the border there are world-class climbing areas.
So do you think it's possible to start in Andorra, to learn, get used to the mountains, having a big dream of going to Himalayas, for example? Yeah,
of course. But it's also just possible to be here without having a big dream.
Yeah.
I don't think climbing needs to be reserved for people who imagine themselves going to the Himalaya. At every level, it's fun because it gets you outdoors. It challenges you physically, so it's good for your fitness, it's good for your strength, it's good for your coordination. It's incredibly satisfying because whatever level you're managing to get up your little climb, your little mountain, you're still getting up it.
Yep.
So there's a rapid positive reinforcement cycle that comes with doing these outdoor challenges, activities.
That's true.
So I think at every level it's worth it.
We are approaching Coll de la Botella, so the place that you saw and thought.
Indeed. So I came here in the winter, probably at the end of 2000, hired a little 4x4. It just snowed. Drove the entire country in 2 days and drove up to here, sort of a little car park here, and just stopped here and walked onto this edge that gives us this amazing view across Andorra. So you can see all of these mountains spread out here. Then we've got the Pal ski resort on the side. And the town is gone. The urban part of Andorra la Vella has just disappeared. And I just looked at all of this, and all of these trees were like heavy with snow, like Christmas cards.
Yeah.
And and the skiing and the wilderness and the snow, and like today, just this huge blue sky. And I was like, I can live here just fine. Where do I sign up?
Perfect. Let's go. Let's go have a look.